In my last episode, I said that an argument for private property rights couldn't be justified on the basis of some natural rights theory, but it could be justified on the basis of overall social benefit. That if the creation of a regime of private property, for example, gave an incentive for the holders of property to pursue the most productive use of their property in order to benefit themselves, and as a side effect, increase the overall wealth of society that then spread throughout it and created a higher standard of living for people, it could be justified. And I think the history of capitalism in the United States has to some degree borne out that kind of process, and so created an argument for a lot of people that maintaining the system of private property is a good thing. But I also question if at this point in time that justification for private property is still valid. Is the pursuit of the most productive use of property creating worse problems than it is solving? That is the creation of greater wealth done at the cost of damage to the environment, particularly climate change? And here think of fossil fuel companies pursuing profits for their investors, even at the cost of contributing to climate change as we can all see it happening. Is that worth it? And there's other things you can ask. What is the effects of the pursuit of profit for private property owners? What is the effect on our health? Pharmaceutical companies pursuing profits and insurance companies pursuing profits both raise the cost of healthcare, and a lot of people aren't able to get the healthcare they need. And I could go on and on of how the pursuit of profit by individual investors has a lot of side effects that are not to the benefit of overall social welfare. Have we reached a tipping point in that where the detrimental effects have outweighed any benefits from it? And I would say there's a case that we have. So how do we remedy that? What can we do differently? How do we incorporate these other considerations into the allocation of material resources to particular uses? How do we improve our quality of life and not just the overall wealth or GNP, the national product of our economy? Now, one way you could do that is to have the individuals who own properties start to incorporate these other considerations into their investment decisions. But I think that's difficult to do, even on the best intentions of some investors, which they don't all have. A lot of them simply want to get the most profit out of their investments, because the vehicles for investing in companies are generally predicated on the principle of looking for the highest return. It becomes very complicated to make decisions about investments that incorporate all these different considerations, health effects and climate effects and so on and so forth. It's hard to do that. It's much simpler to determine where your money is going to go based on its return to your investments. So we've created a social system, including Wall Street and investment firms and all these ways of investing that are all premised on getting a high return for your investment. The only consideration on the other side is how safe do you want your investment to be? So that's difficult to incorporate those different considerations into private investment decisions, or even into investment decisions by mediators between the private investor and the companies they invest in. Well, I think here the best alternative is to give the control of work organizations over to the employees, to the laborers, because laborers will have the desire not only to increase their own wealth, but to have good working conditions and a livable community and all these other things, because they are able to take these things more into consideration, having multiple roles as citizens and workers, and the decisions that they make in the business organization are closer to home. It's harder for them to offset responsibility to someone else. That is, the investor says, well, it's the management's decision how to use that money. The management says, well, we've got a mandate simply to use it to increase wealth. The laborers have no protection against that. They say, we have the responsibility here to decide how work is going to be performed and whether we're going to sacrifice some of our possibility of creating wealth for ourselves against other human considerations. So this dovetails with my argument in the previous section that the laborers would be the most logical choice to give over control of business organizations to. That's a big order, and it has a lot of practical problems attached with it, but this is what I want to leave you with today, is a sense that we could have a political economic system in which investors have property to invest, but that does not give them control over the decisions of the businesses they invest in. It just gives them a right to a return on their investment, along with interest that carries the time factor that they're giving over money that they could have used for consumption. They're giving it to you for a time to use, and risk that both those can be built into an interest rate. So instead of having ownership represented by a stock, they'd simply be investing in bonds that lend money, that allow companies to borrow money and then pay back the principal with interest. Now, the big difference here is that when you have owners who have profits from the company, there's no end to the profits, right? As long as they supposedly own the company, they can get profits. But with bonds, you would say that ownership just gives the right to have a return on what they're lending, and it ends when the principal is repaid.